Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael and this is just a quick look at what I've been up to on my N-gauge viaduct based inner city layout, Chandwell, in February. If you watched my last video, you'll know that I finished the station canopy, so after all of that endless cutting out, I thought I'd do a few little bits of fun things. I did a little bit of ballasting and I added a few frivolous details to the station which I really enjoyed making. I also started to look ahead as to what the next set of station buildings are going to look like. So here's a look at what I got up to on Chandwell in February. Now that the concourse is finished and these two platforms, I thought it was about time that I stuck some ballast down this part of the platform. I used my normal technique, just poured ballast down the middle and then started to rub it all in. Spread it out initially with my fingers, then use a very soft brush. I take my time at this bit because I really need it to be as smooth and as neat as I possibly can get it, especially around the points. So I do spend a long time smoothing it out and getting it as level and as neat as I can. It goes all over the place. Try brushing it back off the platforms and back to where it needs to go. It's looking quite neat, especially around the points, so make sure you need to get it as flat as possible and keep it out of the way of the springs and things. My platforms are very well varnished, as you'll know if you've seen me making them, but I still try to protect the surface of them just by covering it in paper and Weetabix packets. These mock-ups have done their job now, so it's time to put them to another use. The idea here is to get the ballast as wet as possible without disrupting it at all, and to this I use an empty can of Aussie Hair Insurance Miracle leave-in conditioner, and because it's very fine spray. This is filled with water mixed with a little bit of washing up liquid just to reduce the surface tension, and I spray it liberally all over the place. I get the thing really wet. This just helps the glue drip in and apply without disrupting the surface of the fine ballast. So here I've got a tub of my dirty glue mix. This is about 50% PVA and about 50% water, then mixed with various dark shades of brown and black paint. It's very dilute, so the black and the brown paint doesn't make much of a difference at this point, but when it comes to weathering the ballast later, it comes in really handy. I did do a video about the ballasting of the rest of my layout using this technique, and I'll link to that at the end if you're interested. I put a lot of this water down and I do it very liberally. The idea is to get it as soaked into the ballast as possible so that when it dries it's rock solid and I don't need to go over it again. Obviously I'm ballasting here against card platforms, so the platform edges have been varnished extra specially. I actually used enamel varnish around the bottoms just because they're going to be sitting in wet water for 2 or 3 days as it dries, and I didn't want any of it soaking into the card at all, so I used enamel varnish on the edges. And there we go. So once the water is poured on, it's just a case of leaving it to dry. And it's dried okay. There's a few patches that might need to be filled in later, but I'll go past these with PVA and just sprinkle on ballast later. What's this then? We've got a departures and arrivals board. It's got text on it that's too small to be seen by the camera, never mind the naked eye, but I'd spent so long making the station canopy that I just wanted to do something for fun. I'll show you later on the words that are actually on this, and you might recognise some of the places that are on the board. Making it was very simple. First of all, once it's printed, cut it out. Once that's done, use an offcut of 2mm thick card and stick the back of the board to that. Cut it out. Many light strokes of the knife to get through the 2mm card. Score the edges. I've put some blue guidelines on to score this so I can get the folds nice and crisp. What I do is I chop the edges of the blue lines so they go right through the paper, flip it over and then use the back of my knife to join up the marks. This adds a really crisp, beautiful score line, and it doesn't break the surface of the printing. Once scored, cover the back on its 2mm card in a little bit of PVA and stick it together. Fold the edges tightly using the score marks around. Here we are, we've got the beginnings of a departure board. It's looking about what I wanted. So it's a little bit tricky to stick it directly to the layout, so I thought I'd stick it to the roof instead. Little bit of PVA along the back of the board and stick it onto the canopy across one of the girders there, just like that. Got the legs in place. I want to make those the same colour as the columns, so I mix a little bit of blue, white and black paint to get the shade right, and then just apply it with brush. The board is going to stand in a very dark and dingy part of the station, so I don't need to worry about weathering this or getting the colours exactly right, or even making it particularly neat, because it's only ever going to be seen in passing. And there we are. It doesn't look too bad actually. You can hardly read any of the writing, and once it's on the layout you probably won't ever see this, but I think it looks nice, and it was a good way of spending an hour having a little bit of fun after building the canopy. I started it in Inkscape of course, and even though you can never read this writing, I thought I'd have some fun and I made it like this. I based it upon a picture of one I found taken at King's Cross in the late 80s, early 90s I think, and I just basically used Inkscape, some text and some simple lines and rectangles to make this together. You might recognise some of the places that these trains call at. If we look, it's just basically stacks of rectangles, all distributed evenly using Inkscape's tools. If we take a look at this stack and break it apart, we can see that each rectangle comprises a line, a rectangle, a background and some text. It's as simple as that. Didn't go into any more detail, no shading or anything like that on this. Didn't stop there, I thought I'd make something else as well. So here is a little sheet full of ticket machines. These are even tinier than the board, but I made them in the same way. Cut them out, stick them to Weetabix packet, stick a back onto some 2mm card, stick it all together. Once stuck together, simple case of using some red paint, holding them in my tweezers, these things are tiny, and painting them. I wasn't too bothered about getting this absolutely accurately because you're hardly ever going to see them once they're on the layout. There we are, 3 little machines, tiny, to go on the edge of the platform underneath the departure board. I made these in Inkscape too. I used a rectangle for the back, a rectangle for the front, and then a rectangle for the overhanging little bit. I used graduated shades just to make it look a little bit like 3D, and I used an actual photograph of one of the old ticket machines instead of having to draw all the buttons and destinations and things myself. Once on the layout, it looks really good. I'm lighting it from above with a phone torch here, but I'm really pleased with it. On this camera angle, you can actually see some of the detail that's on the board and on the machines. In reality, you'll have to squint really hard to get your head into the right position to be able to see this view, but it was good fun to make. I've added a little bit of relief to the back of the board just to give a little bit of 3D feel to it. There's the 3 ticket machines. I've glued those straight to the platform, whereas the departure board is glued to the roof itself and removes along with the roof. Speaking of Inkscape, if we have a look at my YouTube channel in the Scratch Building with Inkscape section, you'll see my Inkscape videos. I've had quite a few questions recently about Inkscape, both how I did the 3D effect on my iron arch girder bridge, but also how I work with textures, get them scaled, and how to tile them into larger areas. So I'm going to take all of those questions and put them into a Your Questions Answered video, which will be my next video in a couple of weeks. So please watch out for that. In my last video, Chris at Bognor Regis asked me what I did for the ridge of the canopy, and I simply just used a strip of grey paper running along the top just to tie the 2 bits of plastic together. That worked quite well, so I hope that answers your question, Chris. Let me know if you have any other questions and I'll hopefully be able to answer them. So what next for the canopy then? As a couple of you pointed out on the back of my last video, this piece of roof here is floating in an unsupported kind of way, and it looks a little bit unusual. The reason being is, if you have a look at these extra bits of girders sticking out, they are going to be held up by whatever building goes here. So the girders will go into the brickwork or the stonework of that building, similar to what they did at Sheffield Victoria. If you've ever seen pictures of the way the girders were held up by the walls there, something very similar to that. Once that wall is in place, that'll look a lot less unusual and it won't look as though it's floating in an unsupported kind of manner. So with that in mind, I need to decide what buildings to put in this part of the layout. I've got quite a large area to fill and I want it to be as built up as possible. As you know, none of the ground in Chandwell is level. There's different hills and things going all over the place, and if we follow this hill up here, it's not going to flatten off here and become flat. It's going to carry on going upwards Towards the back of the layout here, ground level is going to be 1 or 2 centimetres higher than station concourse level. There's going to be some steps going down onto the station concourse there, and some kind of road, ramp or path going up to the station concourse level here. So what to put in here? My initial thought was one long 2-storey building, which I can make in various different shapes and sizes, but I wanted something, maybe something like Darlington perhaps, with some kind of cab portico or something here and a clock tower above. Thought that would look really good. So to that end I just mocked up just to see what the kind of size would look like. And if we drop something on here, so you can see that the roof would be held up by the wall. The concourse entrance would be here, and that would look quite good, maybe with some kind of arch, or I've actually designed it so there's another piece of this roof which would go in here. But once that was in place, I suddenly realised that a building this big would completely hide the roof. Now, I don't mind so much, but it does look as though it detracts from the roof itself. So I think what I need to do is maybe have a 2-storey building to about here, and then reduce it to a 1-storey building, and possibly even reducing it completely to something like just a car park and a wall or something, some kind of drop-off area here. So with those things in mind, I started investigating possible stations I could use as inspiration, and which I've done and will take a look at now. So what about the station itself then? So I've had a few ideas of buildings that I want to add just by looking through it around Google Maps and stuff. I particularly like this at Blackburn. I really like the way that this canopy comes out across a wide bit of concourse where the cars can go, and I like the fact that it's a 2-storey building but only for half of the length, and it's also got that clock tower at the top. I think a building this kind of shape would really suit the side of Chandwell. But I also like this as well. This is Birmingham Moor Street, and I particularly like on this one the way that those 4 beautiful arched windows go down the side of the station. So this is a terminus like Chandwell, and down here along the side these 4 windows along with its canopy as well are quite inspiring. It's a 1-storey building but it's a tall one, so I think it'll suit really good. And these steps up from the lower level as well, if I can incorporate something like that into the ground level at Chandwell, that will also work really nicely. A station I know really well is Sheffield. These arches out the front and the really elaborate pub next door, which I think was the original waiting room perhaps, and then it curves down to this nice curved wall, again with arched windows and doors and a bits of everything in it. I think something like that would work really nicely. The thing that works best about this though, and I thank my friend Simon for suggesting this because I hadn't actually considered it, is this end of the station, around where the car park and the car drop-off area is. Here the buildings go from the big grand ones at one end to just very simple 1-storey short buildings at this end. This will solve my problem with Chandwell really nicely. I can have those big buildings at one side and then slowly descending to these little tiny buildings, storerooms I guess, toilets perhaps, and the wall at that end. It's also got the glazed canopy as well, which is very similar to the one I made for Chandwell, so I might be able to incorporate that as well. My absolute favourite feature though is this one at Darlington in County Durham. And my absolute favourite feature of it is this portico out the front. It has this incredible clock tower. It's absolutely beautiful. I think by using that as an inspiration, a big clock tower like Darlington's wouldn't look too out of place in Chandwell. So there we are, Moor Street, Sheffield, Darlington and Blackburn. Some kind of combination of all of these is what's going to make the station area at Chandwell. That was February. If you liked that, please give a thumbs up using the thumbs up button in YouTube. I really appreciate all of the feedback that I get. If you've got any questions, please drop them down into the comments below. I appreciate every comment that I get and I do reply to everyone. Next video will be my Your Questions Answered video relating to Inkscape. So if you've got any Inkscape questions you'd like me to answer, please also add those to the comments. In the meantime, and until then, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.